The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
All right, so what we're going to do to begin with is think a little bit about the economic, social, and political, and kind of setting the stage for this. And so, Stacey, if you kind of walk us through this.
Okay. We have 3 of these large Post-it notes up here on the board, one for economic, one labeled social, and one labeled political. And we started kind of breaking down sources according to this ESP model when we were inspired by an activity from the book by Uhuru Williams, who wrote a book about teaching social studies in middle and high school. And we saw him when he came to, what was it, Tenchi Conference?
Yeah, he was at the Tennessee Council for History Education.
Yes, and we got to see him model some of those. And so we've been trying those out a little bit. I'm trying this out also in my teaching historical thinking class at MTSU. And basically, we're trying to think about contexts for primary sources and separate them into these 3 different categories. Now, these are all going to overlap. It's hard to talk about economic policy without talking about social impact and separating those things out. Same thing with economics and politics. When politicians are trying to make economic policy, it's really hard. So we're not saying let's create silos and treat these things like they're all completely different. We're just trying to create an activity so that students can start thinking about different aspects of historical context, because your students may know certain historians, but they probably don't know that history has a lot of sub-disciplines. And some people will identify themselves as economic historians, cultural historians, social historians, institutional historians, etc. And so in order to give them an idea of the kind of interdisciplinarity of history, we thought this might be a good way to help them break down and actually picture out loud why it is that they're putting things in different categories. So let's start with economic. What kinds of things do you think would be in an economic category when we're talking about historical context? What kinds of things would you be looking for and pulling out?
You econ teachers, don't be shy.
Yeah. Nobody wants to speak first.
Are you talking about like policy names or just general economic?
Just general economic things. We'll be getting into more specifics when you look at actual primary sources. So policies, economic policies, what other kinds of keywords or things like that are you looking for that kind of make you think, oh, well, this has an impact on economics, or this relates to economics?
Like growth and demand, GDP.
Yes.
Mass production.
Mass production.
Historical data.
Data, yeah, right. Statistics, things like that.
We're talking about setting the stage for the Great Depression, or just in general? Are we?
Either one. If you want to, talk about the Great Depression in particular.
Okay. I was thinking about the stock market, the huge growth in the stock market, and how people just who didn't know what they were doing invested money and to make a lot of money.
Yeah. So, if we want to move into the Great Depression specifically as a topic already, let's go ahead and do that then. So yeah, you would want to talk about stock market crash. What other kinds of things would you pull out as being economic, that your students would be able to look at a source and be like, well, this is talking about mostly economics. How would they know that?
The banking system?
Yeah, when they're talking about banks and banking systems. Okay, You're gonna be revisiting this ESP thing all day long, so we'll be going back to economics more than I usually do. Okay, let's talk about social history. So social history is a concept that your students might not be able to define. So how would you try to define it to students? Like, what would you say would be included in social history? This is something that became a really big deal in like the 60s and the 70s when different kind of disciplines started looking at different kinds of primary sources and talking about maybe voices that hadn't been heard before, and moving away from the kind of more traditional model of history. So what kinds of things would you bring out and say, well, this is a social aspect?
Minorities. I mean, how minorities express themselves, how minorities wanted to change their status in society. So I think about women, I think about African Americans, think about civil rights.
Yeah. So a lot of minority issues, racial issues would kind of go in this broad category of social history. Good. What other kinds of things?
I think about status. Sorry, I feel like the working class, and then those that have, and
Right. Class issues too, and so this is where your Marxist historians would be coming in and talking about social class. This is where like Howard Zinn's book kind of brings this out. He's like smack dab in that that tradition. His book published in 1980. So yeah, the classes of people. Workers' issues, things like that. All right, now what about...
And I think, wait, before we go to the next one, I think the other thing we want to think about for social is also cultural elements, right? You want to think about how what's happening is going on is impacting culture, popular culture, those kind of things as well.
Yes, and I'm glad Kira reminded me, because we are going to be wrapping that into the social category, although cultural history is itself another category too that you can look at. It's not going to be coming out as much in the sources we're going to be looking at today, so we'll put that in the social category. So yeah, cultural history would be like, popular culture, things like religion, and things like that. Political history, this is something that you find a lot in traditional historiography. What kinds of things would clue you in to, I'm reading about political history here.
Laws.
Yeah, laws.
And politicians.
Yeah, whenever politicians open their mouths. What else?
Government structures.
Thanks, Ashley. Ashley actually used to work with us too last year. So, government structures, right? Things like that. Also, maybe how different nations kind of interact with each other. That's a political thing too. Good. Now, are we going to start writing on this house?
Yeah, so what we're going to do now is add your tables. I want you to think about, we're going to give you guys Post-its, and you're going to think about with each of these three, initially, what are some things that you think when we think about causes of the Great Depression? What are some of the economic causes, some social implications for the cause of the Great Depression, and political causes for the Great Depression? So we're going to put kind of our initial thoughts here, and then throughout the day, we're going to kind of continue to add and refine these as we go through the activities.
Right, and it doesn't have to be a direct cause, although it can be like stock market crash. It can be something that's kind of tangentially related, but part of that same story.
Yeah. So you'll have a Post-it note for each of the three, and you can write your thoughts on those. And then as you go up, we'll put them kind of in a line with each other. So let's see.
We actually just put the stock market again, even though I already said it.
Or speculation.
Oh yeah.
Social, well, what about conspicuous consumption? Is that economic or social?
Okay, that would be both.
Yeah.
maybe the lack of political influence during that time.
I think that's a good way to put it.
All right, has everyone had a chance to add their thoughts? So quickly, let's see some of our initial ideas here. So for under economics, we have stock market borrowing to purchase stocks. We have new restrictions, the use to ensure to make sure this doesn't happen again, and less cautious investing. Credit issues, debt, Dust Bowl, bank run stock market, distrust in money, free market economy, bank failures, moving from agriculture into industrial, over-lending, buying on the margins, inflation, laissez-faire, stock market, and loans. So under social, we have status changes, poverty, prices drop, bread and soup lines, too much partying in the 20s, too much of a good time. Immigration policies, keeping up with the Joneses, outspending wages, consumer culture and nativism, class changes due to World War I, westward movement of the population, conspicuous consumption, faith in the American dream, workers, and mass production. And then under political, you guys had Roosevelt and the New Deal, banking failures and new legislation, a few regulations and safeguards, lack of political influence, Harding, Wilson, and Hoover, laissez-faire policies, pro-business policies, and the Hawley-Smoot tariff, World War I, intervention on a new massive scale. So keep those things in mind, and what we're going to do is we're going to watch a short video where someone is discussing some of the causes of the Great Depression. So I want you to think about things that you hear in this that maybe didn't pop up here that we would want to add to our economic, social, and political.
Now, what caused this mess? Well, the stock market crash is everyone's kind of popular cause of the Great Depression. We had a stock market crash in the fall of 1929. Immediately, we had the Great Depression. Therefore, I used to know the Latin for that, whatever it was, ex post hoc ergo propter hoc. One followed from the other, therefore the first one caused the second one. But there's some truth to it, actually. The stock market lost 80% or 85% of its value from the peak in September 1929 to the trough in July 1932. Now, what could that wipeout of the stock market have done? Well, it destroyed a lot of wealth. There's the so-called wealth effect. So if you were an investor in the stock market, and in the 1920s, a lot of kind of middle-class people got into the stock market for the very first time. There was a lot more buying of stocks on credit. It was the great credit boom. And so a lot of ordinary folk like us got into the stock market, but it was still pretty much a rich man's game. The rich men lost a lot of money, and some of them jumped out of windows on Wall Street. And they certainly, with their decline in wealth, could afford to buy a lot less goods and services than they did before. So there's a wealth effect that matters. Uncertainty about the economy. Even if you were not an investor in the stock market, but you saw the smart rich guys jumping out of windows on Wall Street, you have to be wondering, what in the world is happening here? Is this really healthy? An indication of a healthy economy? Well, probably not. So what are you going to do? What's the logical thing to do if you've got a little money in the bank? Keep it there. Save. You're not going to go out and buy a new car, a new refrigerator, go on a vacation. You're going to hunker down and be as conservative as you can until the clouds have cleared away and you have a better sense of the future of the economy. Christina Romer, some of you may know that name. She's an economic historian who teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. And she was, for a time, President Obama's chairperson of the Council of Economic Advisors. Well, Christina wrote a paper that was published a few years ago looking at this uncertainty effect of the stock market crash. And her research found that after the stock market crash, there was a lot less spending on consumer durable goods, like cars and refrigerators, all those new fangled inventions that had come along in the 20s. But the level of spending on food and fuel and basic necessities kept right on steady. So people kept buying their daily necessities, but they really pulled back on the big ticket spending. And so it did have a measurable effect. That is, the stock market crash did have a measurable effect on spending. And then there's the role of banks. Banks were heavily involved in lending to investors in the stock market. Many banks subsequently failed. So there's this connection, this part of the financial fabric was involved here. So the consensus among economists and economic historians is the stock market crash had some effect. However, as big as it was, still not big enough to have caused the Great Depression. Without the stock market crash alone, we would have had a pretty severe recession, but we would not have had the Great Depression. So there must be more to the story than that. Some people point to the Smoot-Hawley tariff, enacted by Congress in 1930, signed by President Hoover against a petition signed by hundreds of economists at the time saying, don't do this, it's a mistake. Well, big business and agriculture, they wanted protection from foreign competition. They didn't like the fact that there were cheap imported goods of rice and wheat and corn and manufactured goods coming in from abroad. And so they petitioned Congress to raise tariffs, to block those imports or to make them more expensive, to discourage consumers from buying the goods and services. Well, what happens when one country raises its tariff? They all did. It was retaliatory. Canada raised their tariffs. The United Kingdom raised its tariff. France raises its tariff. So everybody's putting up these walls against trade to try to protect their domestic industries from foreign competition, and everybody ends up losing. And so there's a tremendous collapse in world trade. I stole this picture. I borrowed this picture from a book called The World in Depression by Charles Kindleberger, who is an economist and economic historian at MIT. And he investigated the collapse of world trade during the Great Depression. And I thought this was a cool chart because it just shows this downward spiral of world trade that was going on during the Depression. From about $3 billion worth of trade in 1929, it collapsed by 2/3 to less than $1 billion by 1933. So the global economy, that is trading, shrank by 2/3, whereas the US economy shrank by 1/3. So it was a much bigger collapse than the total size of the US, or than the total amount by which the US economy collapsed. However, the US was much of what we call a closed economy in the 1930s. International trade accounted for a relatively small part of domestic US production. So despite the fact that the Smoot-Hawley tariff was not helpful at best, and the other countries retaliated, the decline in world trade, the decline in US exports was not big enough to have caused the Great Depression, although it was another contributor. There's a professor at UCLA, Lee Ohanian, recently has a paper blaming Herbert Hoover for the Great Depression. Now, Hoover has often long been blamed for the Great Depression. He was blamed as this sourpuss who didn't care about people who, heck, it's all right people get laid off. I'm going to put the water cannons on them or worse if they're in trouble. Well, Hoover's been a much maligned individual over the years. He was a great humanitarian during World War I. He basically fed the country of Belgium during the war. He was also he was an engineer by training. He was really an interventionist in the economy and was one for using the government to help solve problems. One thing he did when he saw the Great Depression come on is he asked the big corporations not to cut wages, which was their traditional inclination. When the demand for their products fell, they would cut wages. Prices fell, they'd cut wages.
But they keep people employed.
That's the difference. So according to Ohanian, Hoover brought all these guys in and said, don't cut wages, because if you cut wages, then people won't have income to spend. Well, there is some logic to that, but in a macroeconomic sense, it doesn't hold up. So what happens, is, as you pointed out, instead of cutting wages, they laid people off instead. So it was great if you were one of the 75% who kept a job, but it was not so great for the 25% who went from their wage to nothing. Okay? So it's, that's Ohanian's argument. Now, that's not a widely accepted view. I'm rather skeptical that Hoover had as much power as Ohanian ascribes to him to actually get big business to come in and do what he wanted them to do. But it is true that wages did not fall very rapidly at the beginning of the Depression. As I pointed out in talking to Ohanian, you wouldn't have had this problem if we didn't have deflation. If prices weren't falling, if the prices of the cars that Ford was trying to sell or General Motors was trying to sell, if they weren't falling, then Ford and General Motors wouldn't have had any reason to cut wages or lay people off. So it was the deflation was kind of the problem. It wasn't Hoover so much. And there where I get to the meat of my story, which is to blame the Fed and bank failures and the monetary collapse.
All right, so that gives us kind of an overview of causes of the Great Depression. So again, in your groups, and we're going to come around and give you guys Post-notes again, I want you to think about the things that he talked about in there and think about, are there some additional things from the things that are up here? And if you want to come up here and kind of review what you and your colleagues have come up with so far, we're going to add to our economic, social, and political when we think about, again, causes of the Great Depression. So again, what are some economics, some social implications, and some political causes there?
Oh yeah, he was talking about that people would spend more money on what their needs were than for the luxury things like the appliances.
You didn't go out and buy a new car.
Right, and I think we're getting ready to see that happen again too.
I've been seeing that.
Okay, so now that we've added to this based on what we just saw, now we're actually going to look at some primary sources. So again, this first part today, we're thinking about the historical context for the lead up to the Great Depression. So we're going to look at a series of sources, and in your package, you guys have copies of those. Based on our activity, we also have another copy. So Stacy is going to talk to us about the sources that we have, and is also going to talk us through how we're going to be analyzing these.
Okay. Behind your agendas in your packets, you do have some sources that are front and back stapled together. And you also have the links for those sources in your agendas. And you'll notice that not all of these are coming off of the Library of Congress website. Kira and I had a little bit of a challenge trying to find primary sources about the causes of the Great Depression through the Library of Congress website, which was a surprise to us because there are tons of primary sources about the effects of the Great Depression on the Library of Congress website, including the giant treasure trove of photographs, including Migrant Mother and other kinds of things like that. But we wanted to really get into the nitty-gritty, and boy, we learned a lot this way. So we did find some sources, and Kira found some presidential speeches from other websites. So that's why you'll notice that not all of these are from the Library of Congress website.
Actually, only one of them's not.
Really? Mm-hmm. I thought both the Harding
one.
and the Coolidge speeches weren't.
Yeah, no, just one.
Where's the Harding speech? Where'd you get that? Okay, anyway. So yes, the Coolidge speech then is not available from the Library of Congress. Okay. Now, these are going to be very text heavy, as you can see, and you can, some of these we've already excerpted, but you can excerpt them further for your students to use based on their background and their abilities and their interests. Now, we wanted to approach the analysis of these primary sources in a slightly different way than we usually do. And we're going to use one of these sources as a demo to do all of this together. And then you'll do additional ones. I will pass out. I have ones that are covered in these sleeves that I passed out before I realized that Dr. King would have printouts available for everybody. So you'll have an official copy, which we'll get back, that you can finger all you want, and then you have your ones in your packets that are, the ones that we printed out are slightly higher resolutions, so it might be a little easier to read. Some of those words are a little smeary. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out, this is a total pilot here. You guys are guinea pigs for this, and what I would love is for you all to give us feedback on how to change this for the better before we decide, if we decide to do it, post it on our website as a tool. We have graphic organizers for primary source analysis on our website that we have adapted from various places. Those of you who've been to our workshops before may already be familiar with the Library of Congress analysis worksheet, which has 3 columns: observe, reflect, and question. We've started kind of experimenting with other kinds of graphic organizers that can get us deeper into critical thinking questions. And so there is one that we adapted from a teacher who came to a workshop many years ago that we call the HIPPO worksheet, that you might be familiar with, HIPPO being an acronym. So we actually borrowed that from her, and we have that available through our website. Oh, I can use this. I'll bring it up. And then we also adapted that ESP. Okay, our website is library.
You can just do mtsu.edu. It'll redirect.
Oh, that's true. I can, but I already typed library out. TPS. You can also use the URLs that are on your pencils, and it'll redirect. Yeah, our website looks different. We are hosted through the Walker Library server here at MTSU, and they've recently changed platforms, so that meant we had to change everything too, and we are in the process of updating every single link. So be patient as we do this. But you can see that we have the same things as we did before, and under Tools for Educators, we have analysis worksheets and graphic organizers. So here's where you can find our version of the HIPPO analysis worksheet, which asks about historical context, intended audience, point of view, purpose, and outside information / organization. And then we adapted the ESP into a worksheet that looks like this. So if you like this, you can use this with your students. And we do credit the Uhuru Williams book, of course. And then I also, when I teach, use a book from Bruce Lesh called Why Don't You Just Give Us the Answer? Or why don't you just tell us the answer anyway? And he has a text, context, subtext approach where you're talking about what it says, and then what's going on around this that provides the context, and then the subtext being, all right, what's between the lines here? Tell us about the author, point of view, intended audience. So a lot of these questions you can see completely overlap. And these are not new approaches. You've already been doing various versions of these in your classrooms. But what we did was we combined all those together to create a new graphic organizer that we thought might be more useful when looking at these text-heavy primary sources on a very complicated question. So you can see that along the bottom, the economic, social, and political context boxes are there, which we've just done, so you're a little familiar with that process. So we're going to look at the top part first with a sample primary source. Now, when you get to your individual primary sources to do this on, you don't have to fill out every single box completely, because some of these will, maybe they won't be having a connection to social history, at least one that's obvious, or maybe you won't have any idea what the audience is, or or things like that. So you don't feel like you have to fill this out completely. But we're going to, do I have one open? Yeah. We're going to take the one non-text, and we're going to do it here all together. Now, this is a fun little cartoon that Ethan found for us. And yeah, I'm afraid that this is the best quality that we could get this is from a newspaper, and if you're not already familiar, you can search newspapers through Chronicling America at the Library of Congress. So here we have a 6-panel cartoon, and you can follow along, but maybe this will be easier to read. So this is from a September of 1921 issue of the Washington Herald, Washington, D.C., that is. And so you have 3 different scenarios, each of them with kind of 2 complementary panes. So a splendid investment. Our company is paying 9%. And then he's showing a paper that says XY8Z public utility bond issue 10 million yields 9%. And then the caption says, the man who tells investors how much money the company is making, ... and then defends his high prices by telling consumers how little the company is making, is lying to somebody. And so what he's telling to consumers is, our company is not making money and we cannot reduce prices until our costs have gone down. All right, and now for the second kind of contrast here. The man who thoughtlessly or inconsiderately holds his paper before the car window, meaning the streetcar, right? Obstructing the light from his seatmate, rude, is something to be a miserable type of man around his home. And the wife is saying, do you ever think of anybody but yourself? Okay, and now the last one. The banker who advocates canceling our loans to the Allies. The economic situation would be greatly relieved if cancel our loans to the Allies. Hear, hear. I think you can guess what the next one's going to say. Would be stricken with apoplexy if somebody suggested that he cancel his own loans to his customers. The economic situation would be greatly relieved if you bankers canceled all your loans to your customers. Apoplectic. So, okay, what is the format of this primary source? It's always a good question to start with when you're dealing with students who might gloss over something that is that obvious. It's a format. What type of source is it? Yeah, it's a political cartoon from a newspaper, right? Now, knowing that it's a political cartoon in a newspaper, who's the audience?
All readers.
Readers of the newspaper, right? And what do you think those kind of people would be in 1921? This is in Washington, D.C.
Educated.
Okay, maybe people who are educated. I mean, at least, moderately educated, maybe. What else? Politicians, it might include politicians because DC is a place with politicians.
Middle class.
Middle class people? All right. You can also, and this is something I had not thought to do before, we can find out the history of the Washington Herald, because if you click on the name of the newspaper in Chronicling America, it'll give you a kind of a blurb about that newspaper. And sometimes you'll get clues about political leanings or anything that might give you more of an idea of who they were reaching out to now, apparently. What about the purpose? What is the purpose? What is the message here? What are they trying to convey?
The folks are talking out of both sides of their mouth, like in all aspects of life.
All right, what folks are doing that?
Well, the author is arguing that in society you've got, it looks like the upper class, the politicians, the ruling class are playing both sides of the coin.
Right. These people are, like the way you put it, talking about both sides of their mouth. And the title for this, by the way, is Character Studies. So that's an interesting thing to title it. So what side? I hate to ask it like that, but with a political cartoon, it can be often very obvious. What side is this person on? Okay, so here you can see this talks about the Washington Herald. And this is actually from the Chicago, whatever that word is.
Tribune.
Tribune, thank you. I'm at a really bad angle. Okay. So what side is the author of this cartoon on?
Not pro-business, I'd say. It makes it look like business is the bad guy. He's not helping the people who purchase from them, but all he cares about is greed in himself.
Yeah, not business, not friendly towards the bankers, not friendly towards rude people.
It looks like those who have been entrusted with power have abused that power for their benefit.
Yeah. And this is in 1921. Okay. Now, if you had to say how this contributes to a context, what were the economic elements that you could pick out from here?
Prices?
Yeah, they're talking about prices, loans, investments. Yeah, lots of economic stuff. What about social?
The haves and the have-nots.
Haves and have-nots.
City was booming.
Yeah.
Country wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. And the prices also impact the consumers, you know, and their buying habits. What about anything political in here?
The politicians seem to be on the side of the wealthy.
Cutting off money to the allies.
Yeah, good. So that's the kind of exercise that I'd like for you to try with the sources that I'm going to be handing out. And you have more than 6 in your packets, but I'm going to just do 6 because you're all sitting at tables and I didn't know how the tables were going to be set up when I picked these up and when Kira actually picked most of these up. Okay, so
the relationship between governments and the press have always been recognized as a matter of large importance.
Is it like a editorial or something?
I think it's his opinion of this bill. But he doesn't say what the bill.
Or who it is?
I guess no, he doesn't explain. This, maybe it's one page out of several. But evidently he's doing a bill, but he's talking about the conditions now, which I guess he claims this bill can help.
Right, okay.
Okay, now I'm not going to pull up each of the images on the board because you do have them all in your packets that you could follow along with when the other groups are discussing these individual primary sources. So I thought we'll just go in the order of the packet and look at the ones that people actually have analyzed according to this graphic organizer worksheet. So we'll start off with the McNary-Haugen bill, and that's this table here, right? Okay, so tell us some of the things that you noticed and some of the things that you wrote down on your worksheets.
Do you want to describe the bill first? I mean, we could not. I could not.
You can sum it up.
We could not figure out what the bill was going to do, but there was someone that was giving more of an opinion piece, trying to sway the bill to get approved about how farmers are having to still buy their products from home market, and it costs a lot. But when they go to sell them, because over in Europe and other places the prices are so much cheaper, they're not making the profit because they spend too much and yet have to lower their prices to get it. So, but we never could figure out, well, what does the bill do about that? It just never explained.
Well, this is one page out of a large document. And I do actually have this one on the board because I did want to explain this a little better. This is a 299-page document from the Calvin Coolidge papers. And it includes a lot of things besides just this write-up. But this is the beginning of this particular McNary-Haugen bill discussion. So you can see it's a brief. It's a brief, and it was a brief of the provisions and effect of the bill and objections stated by opponents of the bill and of the answers there too. And you can see it was prepared by these people. No, I don't want to try that. American Farm Bureau Federation, American Livestock Association, National Livestock Association, American Wheat Growers Associated, and Indiana Wheat Growers. So that gives you an idea that might help you with like the purpose. And yeah, sorry, some of these are, you don't have all the information that you need just straight on here. So, okay, what about the format?
Well, it was just typed. I don't know how to, it was just obviously going to me, it looked like a speech. It's going to be read.
Okay.
It's an opinion.
Yeah.
An opinion piece about a bill. And audience.
Oh, those interested, either farming or to Congress or political readers or people who go to political speeches.
Okay, right. And what is the purpose?
Sway approval of the bill.
So they want approval of this bill. Okay. What about the ESP?
Oh, okay. What did we put?
The economics, or the farmer needs help, but we weren't sure exactly how the farmer was going to get help. The farmer, socially, the farmer needs to be on an even playing field with the rest of the producers. And political.
Oh, political is Congress. I just put Congress to the rescue, political intervention.
Okay, good. All right. Any last things to add about that? Were there any things you wanted to say about this source that the worksheet could properly accommodate? Not so much? Okay, now, I do feel a little bit like this one might have been a little unfair because you didn't have all the information about it.
But I wouldn't want to read 229 pages.
No, but I didn't either. I just flipped through some of the additional pages. Okay, so who had Waring-Harding readjustment?
So we said the format was a speech, and it was his, when he was running for presidency, his return to normalcy speech. So the audience would be the public, U.S. public.
Yep.
We said the purpose was to return to normalcy after World War I and to calm people down away from governments.
And did you say that he was running for office at this time?
Yes.
Okay, so what would be another purpose of this speech?
Oh, a campaign, political campaign. Yeah, oh, okay, gotcha.
Well, you have the larger purpose of the, a presidential campaign speech, and then you have the purpose of this particular one, which is this return to normalcy.
Gotcha. For economic, we said against government programs. It was labor directed, so go back to prior to World War I to the laissez-faire economics.
Okay. So this is mentioning some of these government policies growing out of World War I, and that's where, that's where we start running into some trouble. Okay?
For social, we said calling for citizens to focus on the betterment of the country and not kind of against the labor strikes and everything that was happening during the 1920s.
Okay. So we have some labor strikes that are going on, and they will continue to go on. So, what is causing that is a question that you might have. All right, what else?
For political, it's kind of the same as, or kind of ties in with the economics. So obviously going back to laissez-faire economics and just a smaller government. It's like the overall message.
Okay. All right, so yeah, basically he's trying to calm everyone down, and this is 2 years after the end of World War I, so we are trying to kind of talk about peace and what does our economy, what does our society look like in peacetime. And he's going to be the person to get us there, right? Okay, any other thoughts about this speech? Okay, what about Calvin Coolidge address to the American Society of Newspaper Editors, Washington, D.C.? All right, so tell us about this one. What did you write?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving us this very challenging speech.
I excerpted the heck out of this speech, and it was very, very hard.
It was great for AP history class. Okay, but we powered through this. It's a speech. The audience, newspaper editors, and the purpose. One was to kind of outline the significance of free press in our society, and it does this by comparing how it operates in autocratic society versus a democratic society. Yeah. One being more like propaganda, and the purpose here is to educate and enlighten. That's the goal. So that's what it talked about. And a lot of wordy statements. Economic, it talked about the concern about the commercialism side of the press.
Yes.
Okay. You want
Yeah,
to?
well, for that, a few things that we highlighted is that newspaper are great business enterprises earning large profits and controlled by men of wealth. So they fear that in such control, the press may support the private interest of those who own the papers rather than the general interest of the whole paper. And with that, I brought it. This was written in 1925, so it's been almost 100 years, and we're still having those same issues with our media and the press right now as they were having 100 years ago, and I thought that's something that our students could understand.
I felt the same way when I read this. I'm like, you could write these exact same words today about what's going on today.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then socially, it said something about if you use the newspaper or the whole, I take it as media, then newspaper was one of the only ways to communicate. Now we have so many that I included the media in that, whether it's digital, whether it's printed, however you get it. And if you use it, you can use the education of it to open minds. But if you use it as a propaganda tool, you can definitely close the minds of the people. So, which is also a big thing.
I thought about Harding being a newspaper man and all the scandals going on. Maybe this is a response to some of that. Maybe trying to tone that down some.
That's a good political point that we did not address. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, and then there's that, I like that very famous line in the last paragraph that I included in here, where he says, the chief business of the American people is business.
Yes, I also, we've got that underlined. And then we went on and underlined, that especially at this time, they were concerned about producing, buying, selling, investing, and prospering in the world. I think at this point, the focus hasn't been so much on that in the past as it was back then, at least. And it also says the opinion of the minority or the great majority of people will always find those are moving impulses of our life. I thought that was a definite political statement there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess because these are all words coming out of Coolidge's mouth, it's all politically tinged.
Yes.
But yeah, this definitely comes out as a pro-business statement. Which is an interesting place to pin it in 1925. Any other thoughts about this that maybe couldn't quite fit into the graphic organizer very well? Or anybody else? All right, yes, you guys did have the longest one, but I was determined to make it fit on one sheet of paper. So you're welcome.
I feel like our history repeats. The 20s we're busting because we just got finished being in a war. Then the 50s we busted because we were just in another war. And really, after Vietnam finally closed, the 80s. So the 20s and 80s remind me, everybody was getting was purchasing and buying just more than they needed. And kind of seems always to repeat itself, unfortunately.
Well, that's why your students need to pay attention in history class. Who had Barclay Defense attack on tariff?
We did.
And yeah, the newspapers, it's good to emphasize to your students how important news, print media was. So
this is from the Evening Star, but we don't have a location. So,
while you're talking,
okay.
I will bring it.
Okay. So the newspaper article, the audience, since Senator Barkley of Kentucky is actually addressing the Democratic National Committee, we could say it was Democratic voters or people of business interests. We weren't really sure, where his target audience was. And the purpose is just basically tell us how the Smoot-Hawley tariff is not working and is actually bad for the U.S. as opposed to helping the U.S.
Okay, I'll do economic if you want to do that.
All right, it's Washington, D.C.
Okay, under economic, we put tariff versus tourism, and also he mentions farm commodities under the economic portion.
For social, we looked at America against trading with other countries, and again, tourism, jobs, and farmers that were kind of struggling. And then for political, Senator Barkley was challenging the tariff, but we also noted that the president was meeting with business people as well, discussing the tariff.
Yeah. And of course, this is 1930, so we're in the throes. My favorite line is, "Tourists are not produced by American labor." Very few. The way that they emphasize tourism made me wonder, how many people are going abroad as tourists at this time? It made me wonder, is that actually a thing? And they seem to be counting on economic revenue as being a pretty stable thing out of tourism. So I'm like, is that as far-fetched in 1930 as it sounds to me right now? I don't know. Okay. And we included this also because it talks about the Hawley-Smoot tariff, and it was remarkably difficult to find sources that address the Hawley-Smoot tariff, and that's something that's very important in your curriculum standards. All right, any other thoughts on that one? Short newspaper article? Okay. Next, we have Veterans March to Washington.
Okay, we said the format for this was a flyer or handbill, and we also found out that it was broadside. They called it a broadside, which was a large sheet of paper printed on one side, used as poster or announcement. The audience, of course, are the veterans, Negro and white, and all rank and file veterans. The purpose was to demand cash payment of a bonus during this time.
We were looking at the economics. They were talking about wage cuts, that they weren't going to get a bonus. They also were compounding interest, and also that billions were going to billionaires. That was in the handbill. As far as the social, we said that you had, in order to be one of the marchers, you had to belong to a shop, a factory, a mill, a farm, or be elected as a bonus marcher. And they marched to Washington during the opening of Congress, which was December 5th, 1932. And then this was during the political, was during the time of President Hoover. He called, and he referred to the marchers as being criminal. And they said that Wall Street basically did not care, and the government did not care for the bonus marchers.
All right. How do you think you might be able to connect this to events going on today for your students?
Well, we hear a lot, we get a lot of tweets from our president about what's going on with our economy and things. So, I mean, and as far as social, the handbills and stuff, I guess you could say is sort of like Instagram and Facebook, our social media, how we hear about stuff.
This is social media
right
here. It's trying to reach out.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
And as far as veterans, not getting paid, we're going through stuff with our economy where the president's talking about not paying government workers and things, and that includes our armed forces. So that could, affect the veterans where something could be said about that too.
Some of the benefits.
Yeah. So the idea that veterans are not getting what they should be getting, whereas billionaires are still getting what they have been getting, is something that we can definitely relate to today. And I like this because it talks about veterans as a an echelon of society. Like they're a party that have political power, but it's also a social party too. I don't mean social party. You know what I mean? Like a group in society that it can be defined, and they have their own kind of needs and wants.
I guess if you were going to do a similarity, you would say like the veterans, they would look at them as a class. Like, we have social classes, middle class, upper class, lower class. They look at them as a class by themselves.
Right. And so trying to use their lobbying power. And I like the way that they actually say Negro and white. Now you're going to need to tell your students, of course, I know you know this, that in 1932, Negro was how they referred to African Americans. And so this was...
I guess they felt they had to spell it out because of segregation.
Yeah, this is during Jim Crow. But we have African American veterans at this time, and they haven't even achieved full civil rights yet, and so they're
Well, I think that makes this document really unique in talking about how that as they organized this, that they were being inclusive and how unique that is to that time period. And so you can drawing that out, that as they made that argument, they were being more inclusive to who they were, pulling into their group to have a stronger constituency, to have a larger voice, and compare that then maybe to other groups during the time who were also suffering, and were they as inclusive? So looking at some of like the farming organizations and the unions, like who weren't as inclusive.
All right, we have one more source out there in the back.
We had Nation's Business Believed Sound. This is from October 25th, 1929, so the day after the beginning of the crash. This is the aftermath of Black Thursday. Said it is formatted as a newspaper article. Audience being newspaper subscribers. It was from the AP, so really it could be argued that the average American was their audience. And on purpose, on a surface level, we said this was informational, but upon a deeper investigation, this is straight up propaganda. Like that's all this is.
My note is dictated by the Fed. That's
nothing to fear here.
No. On the economic side, we said that everything was based in a sound economic basis. The Fed met, and there was no change in the Fed rediscount rate. The board considered the crisis as past. Like, okay, we got through that. We're good now. And they had examined business, and business is going to be unaffected by this little hiccup. On the social side, and trying to calm people's fears, they said that, all the credit institutions saw this coming. They had prepared for it, they had worked for it, they're good, they knew it was going to happen. They also said, we discussed that the most interesting part of this was they said that the market can no longer be considered as a barometer of prosperity. So we know we are prosperous, And because the market is indicating we are not prosperous, we cannot look at the market anymore.
Yeah, don't trust the indicators, trust us.
Right. And in fact, this may benefit business. That one was fun.
I really feel for the people who had to spin this article, right?
The last paragraph and the last sentences are the only part that start to question the information that was given, where they go and look up the weekly summary of loans to brokers and dealers, and that in the week ending October 24th, that there had been the largest decrease noted in several months. So they're like, huh, that's weird. And that's it. Then the article ends. So
now, it may be that the article does not end there. It may be that my excerpt ends there. And I would have to double check because I don't remember exactly which of these newspaper articles is included in entirety. So you would want to know that, and if that is indeed the case, it certainly changes kind of the way that you read that.
because as it reads right now, the only thing that goes against it is buried at the very end. We're going to hope that you're going to quit reading by now.
I'll try to look it up later. That this is page 2. This is the day after the crash. That initial time period. This is page 2. It's not page 1. That's right. And that's something to think about when we don't know who the author is. It's just an AP writer, but this is page 2. I was looking at the Evening Star that you all did. I mean, that's section B. It's buried. So this is very much a controlled kind of article. They really want you to, it's not just reassuring in a beneficial way, it is in a controlling way. This is all very interesting.
Now, what is going to happen a few days after this article comes out?
Well, Black Tuesday is when the 22nd is. It's when the initial one was, correct?
Yeah, you have like your initial one, and then you have.
Then you had the Thursday one, correct?
The one that
29.
Yeah, 29th, yeah.
I thought it was 29.
Yeah, correct, 29th.
Started on the 24th and continued through the 29th.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it is actually on the first page. And then you have your present situation foreseen, may benefit business, and then we continue on page 2 there. And here's the rest of it right here. So yes, that is the entire article, but it's split between the first and second pages, which is something that you might, this is a good thing to note, that sometimes people who excerpt primary sources and put them on a page for you are kind of, sometimes it helps to look and see where they actually come from, and that makes a difference in this particular one.